Hi everyone, Cleus Glory Young here, author of the Airport Adventure Live Safely Bookazine. Hashtag aviate your mind. So, if you're here in the city of Philadelphia, there's a series of tides that's actually going on. And I mean tides as in what I would refer to as like the ocean. The ocean have different tides. So it could be a high tide or it could be a low tide. So if you're here in the city of Philadelphia, there's a series of tides that's going on. So on the professional level for the teams that are here in Philadelphia, they're doing exceptionally well. They're winning. They're on a high tide, right? The Eagles, the Sixers, the Flyers, the Union, the Phillies. They're doing exceptionally well. So again, they're on a what? A high tide. And then when we go into the community, we're on a low tide. The violence, the crime, the killing, the shooting, the poverty, all these things that are going on, right? We're on a low tide. So it really caught my attention, and I'm like, hey, how is it that our professional teams are winning and our community is losing? So I really started to really pay attention to it, because at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, the teams are winning, but what is it that's causing our community to lose? So I'm going to divert a little, just to bring it back to why I started to pay attention to this, right? So I was involved in this fashion show with Macy's and the NAACP. And while I was in the show, I gave someone my phone to take pictures. I think it was either the night after the show or the next day that I was scrolling through my pictures of what the person had taken, right? And I looked at one of the pictures and it had the NAACP logo in it, which the acronym was actually spelled out. So it caught my attention, and yes, I knew what it meant from the acronym standpoint, what the words were, right? But literally, it caught my attention this time as I scrolled through my pictures, right? So, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That's what the NAACP acronym stands for, right? But we're so accustomed to NAACP. So while I'm scrolling through the pictures, I saw the banner and I saw the words now, and it caught my attention. Advancement of Colored People. Why? Because I'm currently teaching a career development class, and I'm very adamant about the advancement of this concept of career development and the students that are in the class. If you ask them, that's number one thing that I'm adamant about. Like, if we're not here and we're going to advance our career, I'm not interested in coming here and teaching it. So I'm very adamant about it. So this is why it caught my attention, because it was like, hey, the NAACP is about the advancement of colored people, and here's it that I'm in the classroom, and then it's around the advancement of your career. Like literally, if you see the class, that's what it's all about, right? So it caught my attention. So at some point, I started to sit down now and I started to reflect. I'm like, all right, if the NAACP is doing it, I'm doing it in the classroom, right, with the students in career development. How could I really start to pinpoint this concept of what is called an advancement, right? So literally, I went back to my teaching days in the classroom. Why? Because the students were measured on these different standards, three of them primarily: basic, proficient, and advanced. So I started to reflect now, and I'm like, hey, what was the difference between my advanced students, right, in comparison to the students that were basic or proficient? So I started to reflect, because I'm like, hey, if I'm teaching advancement, I need to now look at it from different angles, right? So I started to reflect on that now from a classroom teacher, to the point where I even went online and I started to research it. And I'm like, all right, let me refresh my memory of these standards that the government had set for students. because you're talking about National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, right? It's on a national level, the government, right? Which is on a national level as well. So that's literally how I started to look at it as I went online and researching and kind of going back now and refreshing my mind as far as what is it that I used to teach from that standard, and understanding now what are the different standards between the advanced student, the proficient student, and the basic student. And I know they also have below basic, but that's not really a standard, but it's there, right? So I started to look at it from that angle, from a teaching standpoint. And as I was researching and looking at the different what you would call outcomes that would make someone either in the advanced level or the proficient level, I started to reflect on it now that I really need to incorporate this concept into the class, even though I'm actually doing it already, right? But it's like, hey, I want to pull this in because, as I said, it really caught my attention from the advancement of colored people, right? So now I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, right, what is the difference between these students, the advanced students compared to even the proficient or basic? And as I started to reflect and started to understand now, I'm like, okay. So now as I'm doing the research, I'm putting two and two together because I'm like, hey, the next time I go back to class, I'm going to be even more adamant about it, right? So here's what I started to realize now. As a former teacher, I was a math teacher. So I started to look at this now from the four basic operational signs, right? Subtraction, division, addition, and multiplication. That's how I started to look at the whole ordeal. So I started to realize now, and I'm like, let's go back to now the high tide, right? Which the Philly teams are winning. And I'm like, hey, you know, when a team comes together, right? And when they add their resources, and which is their thoughts and their minds and their intentions, right? And their actions, when they do all these things, right? They start to multiply, and that's how you get a high tide because they're winning. And at the end of the day, that's what team does, right? The concept of a team is to win. So even if, say, for instance, one of our teams here in Philadelphia, they lose, who do they lose to? They lose to another team. So the avenue of a team is to win. It so happened that, yes, in Philadelphia, we're on this high tide that all of our teams are winning, right? But when we go into the community now, it's like, hey, it's on a low tide and they're losing. We're losing in the community, right? So I started to look at the operational sign now, and I'm like, all right, what causes the number to lower, the low tide, right? And when I figured that out, I was like, oh, the division and the subtraction. So when people are divided, right, you get to the point where they become now the subtraction of each other, meaning that they're going to minus from each other, right? Separate. And I started to look at this from a concept of separation, or what I would call segregation, because at the end of the day, when we begin to segregate, this is what we do, we separate. And even though back then segregation was around the concept of black and white, today when you go into the community, you see segregation all over if you pay attention. How do I know? Because literally this week, I went to a meeting, a community meeting, and I sat in there and I keenly observed it from the different operational signs. Like this was what I was studying all week, like paying attention. Why is it that our teams are winning and the community is losing? So here am I in a community meeting and I sat there and I observed it from a mathematical operation sign. And the things that I heard, separation. The things that were done, division. And I'm like, holy crap, this is what's going on in our community. This is why you have all these violence, the crime, the killing. Whenever people come together, right, and they're separated at some point, then this is what will be the result, the low tide. Families, right, relationship, put two people together, they get together, and then what now? They have some type of division. and then they get separated, right? So when I started to look at that, I'm like, hey, we don't need a rocket scientist to come in and figure this out. At the end of the day, this is what's going on in our community. You have the professional teams that are winning is because they come together and they add substance to each other, and they can multiply in the concept of winning. Our community now, when we go into the community and we see the low tide, we're reflecting on the concept of now separation, or what I would say segregation. Our schools are segregated, or churches, or different religious institution, or businesses, or organization, the political aspect. Like, oh my goodness. At the end of the day, I figured this out in math. Math give you results, right? And they don't lie. And when you see the results in our community, they're not lying. You're seeing it day by day. The poverty, the crime, the violence, the killing, all these things, they're not lying. And that's what happened when there's separation, aka segregation. There's a division and subtraction. And you can't lie about that. So we don't need no money to be placed in any research to figure out what's going on. It's simple. When people are separated, right, meaning that they're divided in the mind, right, or something gets subtracted from them, then this is what happens. Divided in the mind or subtracted in the mind, this is what happens, right? So let's go back to the hashtag aviate your mind. So aviate means to go to a whole new destination. If you look at the word your, right? The first three letters are Y-O-U. The last three letters are O-U-R. When you get you and our and we put them together, right? There's only one mind in the community. One mind. And what happens when you separate the mind, right, or you divide the mind, and this is what happens. The teams are winning because they come together and they put their minds together, their intention, their thoughts, and this is what causing them to win. When you go in the community, you could have 50 people in a meeting and you think that they're one-minded. No, they're separated and they're divided. And this is what continues to happen in our community. Until we learn how to come together collectively, then we all could win. And that's what our teams are exemplifying. They're winning because of that. All right. So at the end of the day, let's learn how to aviate your mind, because we get together, and you can't just aviate your mind by yourself. You get together with others, right? Look at it. You think that plane aviates and go to a new destination by itself? No, it takes a team of people to make that happen. Right? All right, so that's it. Let's learn how to advance ourselves so we can collectively win, whether we're in the professional teams or whether we're in the community. In the meantime, God bless.